She thought no one saw her, but he did. Rain poured down the mansion's marble driveway as Daniel Hayes, a self-made millionaire, watched from his office window. His eyes fell on Maria, his maid, sitting quietly near the back garden, her lunchbox on her lap, rainwater dripping from her hair. She wasn't complaining, wasn't rushing inside, just eating silently in the cold rain. That moment broke something inside him, because no one should look that content while suffering that much. The city sky was painted gray, and rain fell like silver threads over the marble estate of Daniel Hayes, a name that stood for success, precision, and power. From his glass-walled office, Daniel looked down at the neatly trimmed gardens where everything was designed to perfection. Nothing ever looked out of place in his world. Until that moment, through the sheets of rain, he noticed a figure sitting at the far edge of the courtyard. It was Maria, the housemaid he'd seen only in passing, quiet and efficient, the kind of person most people overlooked. She was sitting on a small wooden bench under the open sky, her hair damp, her uniform clinging to her shoulders, a foil lunchbox in her hands. The rain poured mercilessly, yet she didn't move. Daniel's brow furrowed. He pressed his hand against the cold glass, watching as she lifted a spoon of rice to her mouth. Slow, calm, unbothered by the storm. She wasn't shielding herself, wasn't seeking cover. Her face was soft, even peaceful. And every few seconds she smiled. A quiet, lonely smile that made something inside him twist. He could have ignored it. He had meetings lined up, emails waiting, calls scheduled, but something about that image refused to leave him. The richest man in the city, sitting behind an oak desk, staring at a woman in the rain, wondering why she looked so content in her struggle. As the minutes passed, the rain grew heavier. He called his assistant. "Why is one of the maids eating outside?" he asked, his tone sharper than intended. The assistant hesitated. "Sir, that's Maria. She's been working here for about a year. She usually eats alone." "Outside? Outside? Even in the rain?" "Yes, sir, always." Daniel didn't reply. He simply stared longer, the hum of rain filling the silence of his office. It made no sense. The mansion had a full-staff kitchen, a cozy dining space. Why would she choose the cold instead of comfort? A few minutes later, Maria stood, gathered her small lunchbox, and walked toward the servant quarters, her shoes splashing through puddles, leaving faint muddy prints across the stone path. Daniel watched until she disappeared from view. That night, as he sat alone in his study, his mind drifted back to her expression, the way she looked up at the sky mid-bite, as if remembering someone. The faint smile that wasn't joy, but acceptance. For a man who had everything, Daniel realized he knew nothing about people like her, those who worked quietly in the background, carrying pain they never spoke of. He thought about calling her in to ask, not to scold, but to understand. Yet for the first time in years, words failed him. Instead, he whispered to himself, almost guiltily, no one should look that peaceful while being that alone. Outside, the rain still fell. But for Daniel Hayes, something far heavier had started to pour, the first drop of compassion. The next morning, the mansion glowed with its usual rhythm of quiet footsteps and distant conversation. But Daniel's mind wasn't on the business meetings or the new luxury project his company was launching. It was on Maria. He waited until the rain began again, just as it had the day before. Through his office window, he spotted her walking out to that same wooden bench, the same foil lunchbox, the same gentle patience. And again she sat unbothered, soaked to the skin, as if the world outside her heart didn't exist. This time, he couldn't just watch. "Call Maria to my office," he told his assistant. Moments later, the door opened quietly. Maria stepped in, holding her damp apron nervously, her eyes low. "You asked for me, sir?" she said softly. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the uncertainty of being noticed by someone like him. Daniel gestured toward the chair. "Please sit," she hesitated. Servants never sat in the master's office. But he nodded again gently, and she obeyed, perching on the edge of the seat, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap. "I noticed you outside," Daniel began. "In the rain. Why do you sit there to eat?" Maria's eyes widened. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to break any rules. I didn't want to disturb anyone in the kitchen. He frowned slightly. Disturb anyone? Maria, you work here. You're a part of this home. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 unspoken truths. Not really, sir. This isn't my home. I just clean it. Her humility hit him like a quiet blow. He could see it now. The worn-out uniform that had been mended in places, the thin hands that spoke of endless work, the tiredness in her eyes that no amount of rest could fix. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Then why the rain? You could have eaten inside. Maria hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. Because the rain reminds me of my husband, she said softly. Daniel blinked, surprised. He passed away last year, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. We used to sell snacks outside a small bus station. Every day we'd eat together under an old tin roof. It leaked, but we didn't care. We'd laugh even when we were drenched. The rain. It makes me feel like he's still there. Her words broke something in the silence. The office, once a place of deals and profit, felt suddenly sacred, filled with a raw kind of truth money could never buy. Maria wiped her eyes quickly and forced another faint smile. I know it looks silly, sir, but when it rains, I just feel less alone. Daniel couldn't speak. For a man who had spent years building empires, this was a lesson no fortune could teach. He nodded slowly, eyes misted. It's not silly, Maria, he said quietly. It's beautiful. And as she left the room, Daniel sat in stillness, his world of wealth and glass towers feeling smaller than ever before. That night, as rain whispered against the mansion's windows once more, Daniel found himself whispering too, not about profits or success, but about humanity. For the first time, he truly saw her. The next morning, the world outside sparkled with sunlight, but Daniel's heart still carried the rain from yesterday. He couldn't shake Maria's words. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her sitting alone, drenched, clutching that tiny lunchbox like it was her last piece of comfort. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't on profit margins or market trends. It was on a woman who made less in a year than he spent on one dinner suit. He walked down to the staff quarters that morning, something he had never done before. The workers stared in disbelief, their boss, the reclusive billionaire, walking among them in silence. He didn't stop until he reached the small back room where Maria lived. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the air was still. A single cot stood in the corner, neatly made. Beside it, a small wooden box, an old photo frame, and a single candle. Daniel's eyes fell on the picture. Maria and a smiling man under a corrugated tin roof, both holding paper cups of tea, laughing despite the rain around them. The same rain she still ate under. He swallowed hard. Sir? A young maid's voice startled him. She stood behind him nervously. Are you looking for Maria? Daniel turned. She's not here? She went to the hospital early this morning, the maid said softly. Her daughter isn't well. Her daughter? Daniel repeated, surprised. The maid nodded. Yes, sir, little Sophia. She's been sick for a while. Maria doesn't talk much about it because she can't afford treatment. She works extra shifts, sometimes skips meals, to pay for her medicine. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Which hospital? St. Mercy Clinic, the maid replied. Within an hour, his car pulled up in front of the small, worn-out hospital tucked between two crowded streets. It was a place Daniel had never noticed before, a place his wealth had never needed to go. Inside, he found Maria sitting on a hard bench in the hallway, holding her daughter's tiny hand. The girl's face was pale, her breathing shallow, a small oxygen mask over her nose. Maria looked exhausted, but when she saw him, she instantly stood, startled. Sir, what are you doing here? She said, wiping her tears quickly. Daniel didn't answer at first. He looked at the little girl, then back at Maria. Why didn't you tell me? He asked gently. She shook her head. It's not your problem, sir. You already do enough by giving me work. I don't want pity. Pity, he echoed softly. Maria, what you've done for this house, the way you carry pain with grace, that's strength, not weakness. Her lips trembled. Tears filled her eyes. Daniel looked at the doctor who walked by and asked, What does she need? The doctor hesitated, then said quietly, "A surgery, sir. Urgent, but expensive." Daniel didn't blink. "Do it," he said firmly. "Everything she needs. Consider it done." Maria gasped, clutching her chest. "Sir, please, I can't." He smiled faintly, his voice steady but kind. "Maria, you gave this house more heart than I ever could. Now let me return a fraction of that." For the first time, the woman who always hid her tears let them fall freely. And as Daniel stood there watching her cry, he realized, sometimes the richest people aren't the ones with everything. They're the ones who still know how to feel. 2 weeks later, the city was wrapped once again in soft, steady rain, the kind that made most people hurry for shelter. But for Maria, it was different now. It felt like a blessing, a cleansing of the pain she'd carried for so long. Inside St. Mercy Clinic, the dull hospital light flickered across the hallway where Daniel stood beside her. Sophia's surgery had just ended. The sound of the rain outside blended with the rhythmic beep of the monitor inside the recovery room. Maria's hands were trembling as she clutched a rosary, whispering silent prayers. Daniel had stayed there the entire time, something no one had expected. The billionaire who once lived behind marble walls and glass towers now sat on a hard plastic chair, waiting like any worried father. When the doctor finally emerged, pulling down his mask with a tired smile, Maria froze. She's going to be okay," the doctor said softly. It was a success. Maria's hands flew to her mouth as tears burst from her eyes. Her knees nearly gave out, and Daniel instinctively reached out, steadying her. She turned to him, sobbing with gratitude. "God bless you, sir." "You saved her." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, Maria, you saved her. I just helped a little." They both stood in silence, the rain still whispering outside. In that moment, the world seemed to slow, the air heavy with emotion, gratitude, and something deeper than words. When Sophia woke up hours later, her small eyes flickered open to see her mother's face. "Mama," she whispered weakly. Maria smiled through her tears. "Yes, my love. You're okay now." Daniel stepped forward with a small stuffed bear he'd bought from the hospital gift shop. "Hey there, little fighter," he said softly. "You scared your mom and me pretty good." The little girl giggled faintly, clutching the bear to her chest. Maria turned away, unable to hold back her tears anymore. Later that evening, when they left the hospital, the rain was still falling. But this time, Maria didn't shy away. She walked straight into it, holding her daughter's hand. Daniel followed beside them, no umbrella, no chauffeur. "Fancy car in sight. You'll catch a cold," Daniel said, smiling as water streamed down his hair. Maria laughed, something he'd never heard her do before. "I've lived through worse storms, sir. This one feels like home." Daniel looked at her, the same woman he'd once passed by without a thought, and saw something extraordinary. The strength, the dignity, the light she carried despite everything. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man of wealth or power. He just felt human. As they reached the street, Sophia lifted her little face to the sky, letting the rain touch her cheeks. "Mama," she said, "it feels like the sky is happy." Maria nodded, looking up too. "Yes, baby, it is." Daniel smiled quietly, his eyes soft. The rain wasn't sadness anymore. It was grace. And under that rain, 3 souls, a billionaire, a maid, and her child, found something more valuable than money could ever buy: a shared humanity. A month later, the mansion that once echoed with quiet formality now felt alive. The cold marble floors seemed warmer somehow, sunlight pooling through the tall windows as laughter floated from the garden. Daniel Hayes sat at the patio table with a cup of coffee, but he wasn't alone this time. Across from him, Maria was helping Sophia water the flowers Daniel had planted just days ago. It had been his idea, a small garden in the corner of his estate filled with roses, daisies, and tulips. "Flowers," he said, "that would make the rain worth waiting for." He watched them with a faint smile. For the first time in years, his mornings weren't filled with emails or stock reports. They were filled with life. Sophia, still recovering but brighter than ever, ran toward him holding a tiny pink flower. "Mr. Daniel, this one's for you." He took it carefully, pretending it was made of glass. "Thank you, Princess. I'll keep it safe." Maria smiled at the exchange, soft, shy, but full of warmth. "You've done so much for us, sir. I don't even know how to thank you." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You already have," he said simply. "You reminded me what it means to actually see people again." Maria's eyes softened. "Most people don't, they just look through you." He nodded, thinking back to the first day he saw her in the rain, soaked, alone, eating quietly as if the world had forgotten she existed. That image had once filled him with confusion. Now it filled him with humility. He had gone from being the man behind the glass to the man who broke it, and stepped into the rain. Later that afternoon, Daniel gathered the staff in the courtyard. Maria stood nervously beside him, unsure why everyone had been called. He smiled at her before addressing the group. "There are moments," he began, "when you realize success isn't measured by what you own, but by what you share. Someone here taught me that without even trying." Maria's heart thudded. "I'd like to officially promote Maria to house manager," Daniel continued, "and make sure she and her daughter have a permanent home here, as family." Gasps and applause rippled through the crowd. Maria's hands flew to her face, tears already spilling over. "Sir, I can't." Daniel stepped closer, smiling. "You've earned it, Maria. This house is brighter because of you." She cried openly now, unable to find words. Sophia hugged her tightly, and Daniel placed a gentle hand on the little girl's shoulder. The sun broke through the clouds then, scattering light across the wet garden. The flowers sparkled with raindrops, tiny reminders of every storm they had survived. As Maria looked up at the sky, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. Not just for the roof above her head, but for the hearts that had opened to her. Daniel looked at her and smiled quietly. "Funny thing," he said. "Sometimes you have to stand in the rain to finally see the sun." Maria nodded, wiping her tears. "And sometimes, sir," she replied softly, "you find angels in the most unexpected places." The wind rustled through the roses. Somewhere deep inside, they both knew. Their lives had changed forever. What began as a rainy lunch had turned into a new beginning. A story not of wealth or charity, but of compassion, humanity, and the quiet power of seeing someone who had always been invisible. And for Daniel Hayes, the man who once lived in silence behind glass walls, that was worth more than every dollar he'd ever earned.